The most pressing priority right now is tackling illegal migration.
It's simply not right that people come here illegally. It must stop.
Well, he may need to sit down for this one. After promising to use what he calls new Brexit freedoms to stop small boat crossings in the English Channel, a new study by Durham University has found Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, the deal also championed by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, is the primary factor in the crisis of small boat crossings in the English Channel. That's right, the government has yet again inflicted a problem on itself. According to the report, it's the government's decision to leave the EU without a returns agreement in place which has led to the skyrocketing number of dangerous crossings. Here are some of the report's key findings. The primary factor behind small boat crossings is the UK's lacking a returns agreement with the EU. The report's main finding is that the lack of a returns agreement with the EU is the primary factor behind the current problem. The government never assessed the impact of the consequences for leaving the EU without a returns agreement to replace the Dublin regulation and was caught by surprise. The UK did not need to leave this agreement in leaving the EU. Non-EU members have returns agreements with the EU. The lack of a returns agreement fueled an increase in crossings. The government did not assess the consequences of leaving a returns agreement with the EU. Since 2016, the government has been warned repeatedly about the consequences of leaving the EU without a returns policy in place, including that it would fuel a large increase in irregular migration. It was asked several times to offer an assessment of the consequences, but it declined. The failure to acknowledge its past policy failure has impacted on its ability to fix it. After repeatedly denying the need to make any assessment of its oven-ready deal, the government appears unable to acknowledge that its failure to agree a returns agreement in this deal would have the consequences it has. This is because to address this failing is to recognise its earlier error, which may have political costs. Under a mechanism known as the Dublin Convention, the British government could previously ask fellow EU nations to take people back if they had passed through safe countries en route to the UK. The deal on returning migrants ended with Brexit, but no alternative was agreed, which has made it far more difficult to return any new arrivals. And as the report concludes, the government's failure to acknowledge its past policy failure has impacted on its ability to fix it. As for this,
the most pressing priority right now is tackling illegal migration.
A problem it now seems has been largely created by the government itself. Some might think little things like the biggest drop in living standards since records began and average wages falling at their fastest rate for more than 2 decades should be a bit more pressing.
We need to move away from the ECHR definition of asylum, right? It is, yes, you're right, we should clap that because it is important, right? It is far too broad and allows lefty lawyers to exploit it and frustrate our efforts.
Well, let's break that one down.
We need to move away from the ECHR definition of asylum, right?
There is no ECHR definition of asylum and Sunak knows it. The ECHR is human rights, and the rights that may constitute barriers to removing an asylum seeker are Article 2, which guarantees the right to life, and Article 3, which prohibits torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment.
It is far too broad.
If the rights that may constitute barriers to removing an asylum seeker are the right to life and the prohibition of torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, which bit of that is too broad? And now Sunak refuses to rule out the UK joining Russia and Belarus as the only European countries outside the Human Rights Convention. It's unthinkable. The European Convention on Human Rights protects the right to a fair trial, freedom of assembly and expression, the right to participate in free elections, freedom of religion, freedom from discrimination, the right to privacy, freedom from torture and degrading treatment.
We do need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
Meanwhile, Sunak shamelessly blames what he calls
Lefty lawyers.
We're introducing new laws that make it unambiguously clear that if you come to our country illegally, you will not have the right to stay and will be removed.
But not even the Home Secretary is able to explain how an asylum seeker could actually get to the UK safely and legally. Watch this next bit in disbelief.
Just a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment, what is a safe and legal route for me to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, we have. You're fleeing which country? Sorry.
Any African country.
Any African country. Well,
Could be any continent, but let's say any African country. I don't want to name one because then their Prime Minister might have a go at me for demonising their population. So let's just theoretically talk about an African country which is going through a period of turbulence and which is persecuting its citizens, including an innocent 16-year-old like me.
well, we have an asylum system, and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dub scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.